I'm 88 years old, and I wake up every morning surprised that I still do. That's not poetry, it's just the truth. At this age, you stop assuming you'll see the next season. You fold your sweater a little slower. You sit down before you need to. You look at your hands and don't quite recognize them. I didn't expect my life to end like this. Not in some dramatic way. Nothing exploded. Nothing scandalous happened. It just narrowed. That's the word for it. My world narrowed until it became this small apartment, this chair by the window, this quiet that hums louder than anything I ever worked for. I used to think old age would feel earned, like a reward. You work hard, you raise a family, you put money away, and then you rest. That's what I thought. I was wrong. I spend most afternoons watching the light move across the floor. It's strange what becomes important at 88. The way the sun hits the carpet, the sound of a neighbor's door closing, whether the phone rings. It doesn't ring much. I wasn't always alone, I need to say that. I had a full life, a respectable life. I did everything the way a man was supposed to. I married at 26, she was 23. I can still see her the first day I met her, standing outside a diner on Main Street, brushing her hair back with that impatient little flick of her hand. I told myself I'd ask her out if she looked up. She did. Her name was Margaret. She had steady eyes, not flashy, just steady, the kind of eyes that make you feel chosen. We built a life the way people did back then. Practical, responsible. I worked long hours, sales at first, then management. I was proud of how tired I was, thought it meant I was doing something right. We bought a house we couldn't quite afford, had 2 kids close together. I remember standing in the hospital hallway after my son was born, staring at the vending machine like it held the secret to fatherhood. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I had to provide. That word, provide, became the center of everything. If I stayed late, it was for them. If I missed dinner, it was for them. If I traveled 3 states away for a contract, it was for them. That's what I told myself. Margaret would wait up sometimes. I'd come in after 10. The house quiet except for the refrigerator humming. She'd be at the kitchen table with a book she hadn't really been reading. "You missed Emma's recital," she'd say gently. "I know," I'd answer. "This deal could change everything." Everything. I use that word a lot. The thing about everything is that it usually means money. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't unfaithful. I wasn't some villain in my own story. I loved my family. I just loved the feeling of being needed out there too. At work, people listened when I spoke. They depended on me. There were numbers to hit, targets, clear wins. At home, the wins were quieter. You didn't always notice them. Emma stopped asking if I'd be at her next recital. My son David learned how to throw a baseball with the neighbor because I was on the road. Margaret stopped waiting up. It didn't happen in one moment. That's the part people don't tell you. Distance doesn't arrive like a storm. It settles like dust, a thin layer at a time. I'd tell myself, once this promotion comes through, I'll ease up. It came through. Then it was, once we pay off the house. We paid it off. There'll be more time, I thought. There's always more time when you're 40. When you're 55, you assume the people you love will stay in place while you finish what feels urgent. I remember one Sunday afternoon, I was in the yard, going over paperwork instead of playing catch with David. He must have been 12. He stood there with his glove on, waiting, not complaining, just waiting. "I'll be there in a minute," I said without looking up. He nodded. When I finally stepped outside, he was gone. Glove on the porch, door closed. I don't know why that memory visits me now, but it does. Maybe because it was small. No fight, no tears. Just a boy deciding not to wait anymore. Margaret and I grew polite with each other. That's worse than fighting. Polite means you've both given up trying to be understood. She found her own routines, church groups, book clubs, long walks with friends whose husbands were just as busy as I was. We sat on opposite ends of the couch in the evenings, television filling the space where conversation used to live. I told myself this was normal. Marriage settles, kids grow, life evens out. Then one winter, Margaret got sick. Nothing dramatic at first, just tired. A cough that lingered. She waved it off. I waved it off harder. We had a cruise planned for the spring. First real vacation in years. It's just a bug, I said. It wasn't. By the time we took it seriously, the doctor's voice had that careful tone I'd heard only at funerals. There are words you never forget hearing in a small white room, words that make the air feel thin. I remember holding Margaret's hand and thinking, this can't be it. We were just about to start living. That's the cruelty of delay. You think life is waiting in the next chapter. Her last months were quiet, painful, humbling. I sat beside her hospital bed and tried to compress decades of absence into a few whispered apologies. She didn't accuse me. That almost made it worse. One night she looked at me and said, "You were always trying so hard. Not, you loved us well. Not, you were a good husband. Just trying." She died in early spring. The cruise brochures were still on the kitchen counter. After the funeral, the house felt cavernous. I walked from room to room like a man who'd misplaced something essential. Her robe still hung behind the bathroom door. Her reading glasses rested on the nightstand. I retired a year later. Thought maybe I'd make up for it somehow. Be the father who shows up, the grandfather who's present. But the children had their own lives by then. Emma lived across the country. David worked long hours, just like I had. Funny how that works. We were cordial. Holiday calls, occasional visits. They loved me, I know they did. But there was a stiffness, as if we were all careful not to step on something fragile. You can't build intimacy at 70 that you neglected at 40. You can try. I did. It just doesn't root the same way. Friends began to disappear, one by one. Heart attacks, strokes, quiet departures in their sleep. The phone rang less each year. I moved into this apartment after I fell in the kitchen and lay there for an hour before anyone knew. That was the day I realized independence is a young man's illusion. Now my days are small. I heat soup. I read the paper slowly. I sit by the window and watch other people hurry somewhere important. I wonder what they think is waiting for them. I don't feel bitter. That's the strange part. I feel aware. Aware that I traded presence for progress. That I confused effort with love. That I believed there would be a better time to sit still with the people who mattered. There wasn't. The turning point wasn't Margaret's death, not really. It was a visit from Emma a few years ago. She stood in this very room, looking around at my tidy, lonely space. We talked about safe things, weather, her kids' school schedules, flights. As she was leaving, she hugged me longer than usual. Then she said, "I wish we'd known you more when we were little." She didn't say it angrily, just softly, like an observation. That sentence has lived with me ever since. I was there. I paid for braces and college and summer camps. I fixed the roof and mowed the lawn, but they didn't know me. I was always headed somewhere else, even when I was home at 88. There are no more promotions, no more chances to rewrite the middle. There's only memory. And memory is honest in a way youth isn't. What can't be fixed is time spent looking past the moment you were in. I can't go back to that Sunday with the glove on the porch. I can't sit beside Margaret at 35 and choose to close the briefcase instead of opening it. I can't give my children The version of me that wasn't tired, distracted, reaching. I did what I thought was right. That's the hardest part to admit. Most regrets aren't about wicked choices. They're about reasonable ones repeated too often. I don't hate my life. There was love in it. There was laughter. Christmas mornings, road trips with bad singing and spilled juice boxes. I hold on to those, but I also hold the empty spaces between them. If you're listening to an old man who has more yesterdays than tomorrows, let me say this gently. The world will always tell you something is urgent. Someone will always need that extra hour, that extra trip, that extra proof of your worth. The people at your table won't always ask twice. I thought I was building security. I didn't notice I was building distance. Now, when the phone rings, my heart jumps in a way it never did for a business call. When my grandson visits and tells me about his science project, I listen like it's the only story in the world. Because it is. But visits end. Doors close. The quiet returns. I sit here at 88, surprised by how quickly it all went. Not the years themselves, the chances inside them. I didn't expect my life to end like this. I thought there would be a grand feeling of completion. Instead, there's a mix of gratitude and a dull ache that never quite leaves. Maybe that's what an honest life looks like at the end. Not perfect, not tragic, just human. If this meant something to you, I hope you'll sit a little longer at your own table tonight. Not because an old man told you to, but because someday you might be 88, watching the light move across the floor, wishing you had.